Bays 149b. And the topic of conversation was our Mishnah that said that a shchimera, someone who's on his deathbed, who gives over all of his property and leaves over a little bit, so then when he gets better, he can't retract on that. But if he leaves over nothing, so then he could retract. Now, the Mishnah only talked about karka, land. It didn't talk about movable properties. So that was one. And two, it said kol shuhu. He leaves over a kol shu, a something. What's a something? So that the beginning of this daf said that something means enough to sustain yourself. And you should also know that karka, land, doesn't only mean land, it also means movables. And on this, we're going to have what to say. Does karka always mean also movables? Only sometimes? So now let's see. Right, and we explained that the reason why it would make sense that it should mean movables is because these are things that you rely upon. So just like land, a person relies upon land for sustenance, a person relies on their movables also. And therefore, when he left over some land to live off of, he wasn't coming to exclude movables, because if you have enough to live off of, a person would leave over some movables also. Fine. So now we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. Maskeflo Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef is going to have a problem with this. Umay kavanasa. I don't think your kavanah was good. Your intention was good. I don't think you were saying things that were proper. Mechuvan means like in line. Like you weren't in line with what I think is true. Why? Manda Amar Metatlin Mandamin Metatlin Karka Tanan. The Mishnah says a shchimera who leaves over karka, then and only then it sounds like if he gets better, so then it's a good sale. He can't retract on it. If he were to give away all of his karka, all of his land, however, he would retain some movables for himself. Sounds like if he would get better, he would receive all of that land back. So meaning when a person on his deathbed gives away his property, right? So the rule is if he leaves some over, so then you see he left some over because he wanted to be a good sale, and there's a chance he might make it, and therefore if he makes it so that he survives, he only keeps that which he left over. So, but that's only true by land. That's what the Mishnah says. It doesn't say anything about movable property. It's only by land. It says karka tanan. The Mishnah said karka, land. That's one. Second problem is manda amar kidei parnasaso. Where'd you get this amount of kidei parnasaso, the amount he needs to live off of? It's kol shuhu tanan. The Mishnah said if you leave over a kol shuhu, that's already enough that if you get better, then the sale is null and void. Then the sale is a good sale. But if you leave nothing over, so then if you get better, then the sale is null and void, or the gift is null and void. Not the sale, the gift. So he has two problems. First of all, it says karka, land, doesn't say movables. Second of all, it says kol shuhu. Kol shuhu is the most minimal amount. And you said it means an amount that he needs to survive off of. So those two things he has a problem with. So now let's see. Amarle Abaye told him, is that true? Like you made an assumption that because it says land, it means only land and non-movables. But is that true? The kol tani karka dafka tanan. The kol tani karka dafka. Whenever in the Mishnayos it says land, it really means only land and nothing else. I'll prove to you not that way. The Mishnah in Peah is talking about a master who has avadim, who has servants, and he wants to free them. Now, usually anything a servant gets, it's called yad eved ki yad rabbo. Whatever a servant gets, it goes right to the master. He doesn't have a hand of his own, so to speak. He's under the jurisdiction of the master. It's like imagine you're working for a company and then someone comes writes a check to you. He means to give it to the company. Just because he gave it to you doesn't mean it's yours. So the hatanan. So what happens like this? Hakose kol nechaslado. The master writes all of his possessions to his servant. He writes him a document saying, I hereby give all my possessions to you. Well, if you say all my possessions, then a servant is included under. So therefore, he's free. He just freed himself, meaning the master freed him. Yatsa ben Chorun. Now, what about he writes, all my possessions are to you, except for some land. Except for some land, all my possessions are gonna go to you, except for land. And he doesn't specify anything. He doesn't say where the land is, what kind of land it is. So now, lo yatsa ben chorun, the servant doesn't go free, because the Torah compares a servant to land for a variety of laws on what you can make an oath on what you can overcharge for. I think there's different rules on what you can inherit to other people. There's different laws that the Torah compares a servant to land. Once the Torah compared those two for certain halachas, so for certain laws, so then sometimes when a person means land, he doesn't mean necessarily the physical property of land, but he means things that have a halachic status of land. So now, if he leaves over some land, doesn't specify, then we say lo yatsa ben chorun. Then the servant does not go free, because it's referring to him. Could be it's referring to him. We assume it's referring to him. So, and by the way, since he doesn't go free, all the other property he gets, he also can't acquire, because he's still under the jurisdiction of his master. That's the first opinion. Rabbi Shimon Omer la'olam hu ben chorin. Even if the guy leaves over some land, the servant is still a free man. Because who says he's like land? He's a person, he's not land. Ad shiomar, until you say kol nechasai nitzun ploni. You say all of my possessions are given leploni abdi to ploni my servant. Chutz mi echad mi rebua shaban. Interesting case. If you write all my property is given over to you, except for 1/10,000th that I own. So in that case, we assume that amount is going on the servant. That amount is referring to the servant himself, and therefore, in that case, he will not go free. So, yeah, I'm not sure exactly why what the rationale behind this opinion is so much. Why 1/10,000 of my property, right? That refers to a servant, but just land doesn't refer to a servant. I don't have a chance to look it up over there in Peah, but it sounds like maybe land in general is much more vague, so that we can assume refers to real land. When you're so specific, maybe about what you're leaving over, we understand that that's referring to a servant. Yeah.
The master signs little worth this.
Yeah. So somehow the very little amount of worth of 1/10,000 is recognizable that it's referring to the servant. So okay, so now that's 2. 3. The Amar of Dimi Bar Yosef, Amar Balazar. So first of all, what do you see from here? First of all, you see that even though it refers to land, he says land, right? He excludes land. We say it refers to a servant. A servant is definitely a movable object, right? He can walk, he can go on his own. And yet we see that land could refer to also servants. So that's the first thing. Now we showed you that when it says land, it doesn't always mean land. It can also mean servants. So therefore, in our Mishnah here, when it's talking about a shchit meira, when he leaves over land, it could also mean movables. That's the first thing. And on the second thing he said, V'amar Rav Yosef, V'amar Rav Dimi Bar Yosef. Rav Dimi said, in the name of Rabbi Lazar, Asu metaltalin shir etzel eved, v'lo asu metaltalin shir etzel ksuba. So, yeah, says Rav Dimi that they made when it came to an eved, a servant, they made metaltalin movables just like karka. When he said, I'm leaving over a little bit of land, that was referring to an eved. However, when it came to a ksuva, that they didn't do. So what exactly is the case of the ksuba? We had this a little bit earlier, where basically a person who's married, he writes all of his possessions to his children. Now we know that in case of death or divorce, he's going to owe his wife from the ksuba. So if he would write all of his possessions to his children and writes a little bit of land to his wife, So then, and she remains silent. So, so then we assume that any land she saw being given over to her children, she forgoes on, and the little bit of land she keeps for herself. However, so once again, a guy's writing over, he has $1,000 of property, he has $1 million of property. She's watching him write, 99 million of that, 909,000 of that property goes to the sons. She doesn't say anything. Sounds like she forgoes on that and is willing to not collect from that if it were come to the case where she has to collect from her ksuba. But he gives her a little bit. That's only when he gives her a little bit of land. If he were to give his sons all the land, then the halacha will be different. We'll see later today why. But so what happens in that case if he gives over all the property to his son, all the real estate to the children, but leaves her over some movables? So in that case, we say no, that doesn't work. When it comes to a woman, she's much more reliant on land and not on movables. So fine. But what do we see? We still see that by our case here of the eved, of the servant, it says karka, it says land, but it's referring to an eved. It's referring to a servant. Yeah. Okay. So now, that was the question Abai had on Rav Yosef, on his two questions that he had. So, says the Gemara, no. Hasam b'dinhu delo lisni karka. There was no reason to say karka. There means in the case of where the eved, where the guy writes all of his possessions to an eved except for some land. So really, you didn't have to say land. We want to bring a proof that whenever it says land, it doesn't only mean land. So if you give all your property to your servant and leave over some land, even a servant is included. So it says the Gemara, no, there it really didn't have to say karka. So why did it say it? The idea, the Tana Resha, the beginning of the Mishnah over there, used an example of karka. So the seif at the end of the Mishnah was just saying the same parallel to the beginning to make it more in line with each other. So sometimes you have at the end of Mishnayos will use certain phraseology to be similar to the beginning of the Mishnah, right? Because they used to memorize the Mishnayos, they used to learn them by heart. Sometimes to make it easier, they would have the same word in the beginning. Same word in the beginning of the Mishnah will be the same word at the end. But what are we basically saying? That you didn't have to write karka in this case. It was just there because the beginning of the Mishnah said the word karka. So you can't bring a proof from there to a case like our Mishnah, which was its own isolated case, and it said karka. Maybe when a Mishnah is isolated and it says karka, it means land. As opposed to a long Mishnah that has a beginning and an end, there, since the beginning said karka, then the end of the Mishnah also chose the word karka. So what was the beginning of the Mishnah over there by an Eved? The idea Tana Reish Rabbi Kiva Omer Karka Kolshu Chayeves Peya. If you own a little bit of property, so right away you're obligated in Peya to give over the corner of your field, Ube Bikurim, and you have to give over the first fruits, Vilichtam Leim Prusbol, and we know that when Shemitah comes, the loans get canceled. But if you own a little bit of land, so then you can write a prusbol. It gives over your money to it's going to give over the property over to the Bezdin, and they're going to make sure your loans aren't canceled. Along with land, you can acquire a lot of property. You can acquire with property. You can acquire other things that don't have insurance, like property does, such as movables. So if I'm acquiring land, I can also acquire with the land the movables. So therefore, basically a long list in the beginning, all related to karka. These are all halachas that Rabbi Kiva said over, that if you own land, and specifically land. So now when the end of the Mishnah talked about an eved and leaving over something, it chose land to parallel the beginning. Okay. Mishum hachi, therefore, katani karka. So in terms of that first idea that you want to bring me a proof that when it says karka, it's referring to, it's not only referring to karka, I don't find that proof so compelling because there's another reason that it chose karka over there. So that's one. Two is, The kol heicha detani kol shehu, lesle shiura, meaning Rav Yosef took issue that we interpreted our Mishnah when our Mishnah said you leave over a kol shehu of land, a little bit of land. What's a little bit of land? So we said it means enough to sustain yourself. Rav Yosef said, that's not what it says. According to Rav Yosef, it said a kol shehu. That means even an amount which you cannot sustain yourself. That's what it says. So on that, Abaye says, why every time it says a kol shehu, it has no amount. Meaning, who told you that a kol? You're making an assumption. When it says kol shehu, you're reading the words literally, and you're saying it means literally a kol shehu, which is no amount. Which then you're bothered by. How could we interpret the Mishnah as saying that a kol shehu means a certain amount? However, maybe a kol shehu depends on the context. It's a way of referring. It's just a reference point. Maybe the kol shehu is a reference point, and depending on the context, you'll interpret it according to what you need. So in this case, a guy's dying and giving over all of his land. So if he leaves over a kol shehu, so maybe in the context, it makes a lot of sense to say he leaves over enough to survive on, to live off of. But for that, we need to bring a proof that the word kol shehu in another place doesn't mean kol shehu. If we can do that, then we have a good question. So let's see. The kol heicha kol shehu lesle shiura. Is that true? When it says kol shehu, it has no set amount. The hatnan, but the Mishnah says in Kollel. Okay, we're traveling all around the Torah today. So now we're talking about the shearings of a sheep. You have to give some amount. After some amount of shearings, you have to give a portion of that to the Kohen. So now, one opinion there is in the Mishnah is v'hatnan Rabbi Dosa ben Hurkanus Omer. He says when you have 5 sheep, chamish rachelos, so then gozazos mana upras. So when you have 5 sheep, then you have to give a mana upras. That amount, that measurement, you have to give that measurement to the Kohen. Yeah. Between all 5 sheeps, you have to have a mana upras, a mana and a pras between the 5 of them. Chayavos bereishis again. V'chachamim omrim, and the chachamim say, chamish rachelos gozazos kol shehein, kol shehein. That's the key word we need. The rabbis say you have to have 5 sheep, and as long as between the 5 sheep there's a kol shehein. Well, it's a kol shehein. So once again, literally, it can mean the smallest amount. However, it's interpreted to mean v'amrina and v'kama kol shehein. What's a kol shehein? Amarav mana upras, also a mana upras. However, ubilvad shiu michumashos. The chachamim say. So the first opinion said you have to have a mana upras total. The chachamim argue and say you have to have a mana upras, that amount. However, each sheep has to produce 1/5 of that amount. So if you have 5 sheep and you total a mana upras, according to the first opinion, you're good to go. According to the second opinion, if one sheep had a ton of shearings and the other 4 fell very short, it's not going to work. You have to have 5 sheep, and each one has to have 1/5 of a mana and a pras. But what do you see? The chachamim said a kol shehein, and we interpret it to mean as a mana upras. So therefore, when it says kol shehein, you can't bring me a proof that it has to mean the minimal amount. We see another case in Kollel that it means a certain amount. It doesn't mean a kol shehein. It means a 1/5 of a mana upras. So once again, Rabbi Yosef will get out of it and say you can't bring me a proof from Kollel. Why? Because the following. Hasam bedinhu delolis nikolshu. Really, over there, the chachamim should not have been vague. They shouldn't have said a kol shehu. They should have said a manu pras, as long as each sheep gives 1/5. However, why did the rabbis there in the Mishnah say a kol shehu? Why did the ka'amar tanakama shiura rabba? Since the first opinion gave a very large amount, a manu pras, just to contrast with a large amount and to tell you that we require you to give us a smaller amount. So therefore, amar ihunami shiura zutra, kari la kol shehu. when you're contrasting two things, so the first opinion said a manu pras. Ooh, that's a lot. So how can I say that really you have to give a little bit less? So what language should I choose? The Chachamim chose a kol shehin. They chose a kol shehin.
Where are the 20%?
That's a great question.
That's just, I mean, it's not like a 10%.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to wait to see Chulin.
Okay.
Like in Chulin, I don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
Oh, here, 1 second. Maybe the Rashbam answers your question. Hold on. You need 5. No, because it's because you need 5. That's the point. It sounds like because there's a I mean, you have to have 5 sheep. It sounds like over there in Chulin. So yeah, we have to see there. Af Kuf Lamed Hey in Chulin. But meaning the logic is for whatever the source is, this I have this, but I don't know. We require 5 sheep. So now, if a sheep has less than a fifth, it's not considered part of the. We need shearings from 5 sheep.
Oh,
If one sheep has 1%, that's not considered a shearing of a sheep. Something like that.
Okay.
So once again, since the first opinion said that each sheep has to have, the first opinion was it sounds like has to have the weight of a mana upras. It's a lot. So to contrast that, he said, no. You have to have a mana upras total. As long as each sheep gets 20%, that's fine. So, but yeah, well, we can look it up. I get back to you. So, fine. So once again, therefore, you cannot bring a proof that a kol shehu is a requisite amount. Now, once again, when Rabbi Yosef said a statement, so the Rishonim point out that whenever someone in the Gemara says something, they knew all the Mishnayos backwards and forwards, right? So meaning we're asking on him from 2 Mishnayos. So he had an answer ready to go. The similar answer in both cases is that in each of those cases, it's contrasting to another opinion. Whether it's a language that's used in the beginning of the Mishnah, we want to parallel it, or whether it's contrasting to another opinion that has a very exorbitant amount. I'm contrasting to that, but he knew that our Mishnah is an isolated Mishnah. It's 2 lines, 3 lines, and it just says Mishayir Karka Kol Shehu. That's when Rabbi Yosef felt that if it just says Kol Shehu, to put a specific amount to that is inaccurate. So at the end of the day, it's a disagreement. Rabbi Yosef and others, does Karka mean specifically Karka, only land? Some say, he says yes, others say no. And when it says Kol Shehu, he says it means a Kol Shehu. And others say no, it means enough to survive on. Okay. So now we're going to talk about different phraseologies that are used. One of our favorite topics in Bava Batra, right? So, Pshita, Amar, it's obvious that when a person says, Metaltali Leplanya, when you say, my movables go to Ploni, so then, Kol Mani Tashmishase Kani, all of my movables are acquired to him. They go to him, except for Lebar Michiti Visari. My wheat and barley does not go to him. Only my movables go to him. And the Rashbam says also the animals don't go. But just, when you say movables, so your car will go, or maybe your books will go, the couch will go, but your food will not go. Yeah. Fine. That we understand. Now, what if he says instead of saying metaltali leplanya, my movables go to somebody, he says kol metaltali leplanya, all of my movables. He adds the word kol. So now, literally, all of your movables, afilu chiti v'sari, even your wheat and barley, anything which is not real estate goes. It's all my movables. So you go around the house, and everything that's not real estate is given to the other guy. Says the Gemara, the afilu rechaim halyona. Now you have to ask your local farmer, but they had 2 big mills. They had an upper mill and a lower mill. So he's saying afilu rechaim halyona, which is a mill that doesn't move so often, even that will be included. However, the lower mill, lebar merechaim hatachtona, the lower mill was almost never, it sounds like, ever moved. It was just there, and even when they wanted to fix it, they wouldn't take it to the shop. They would go there, and they wouldn't move it around. It would be very, very stationary. So it's an example of a movable, technically, which is totally stationary. It never moves. So even when you say all my movables, this one, even though it's not real estate, but because it never really moves, it has the same status as real estate. The Rashbam says that the upper mill, I'm guessing it was either smaller in size or it was maybe much easier. It was built to be to be moved much easily. The Rashbam says they would often take it. They would take the mill. I guess it was attached to the bottom of the mill. They would take the part that needed fixing, remove it, go fix it and bring it back. The bottom mill, if you wanted to fix it, you have to go to it. It's not going anywhere. It's pretty big, yeah. Right. So even here we say all my movables, but we do not include a lower mill. Okay. Kol dimitaltel, anything which could move. So we don't care now, whether it does or doesn't. As long as it could move, then it'll be considered under this category. Kol dimitaltel, anything which could move. So then afilu rechaim atachtona kani. Fine. Those four things, different ways to sell your movables. And if you want to sell them and you already have a document, make sure you write it precisely to leave no ambiguity. Fine. So now, ibailahu avda kimikarka kimitaltala. Where does a servant fit into this? So once again, on the one hand, we definitely don't view him like land. He's movable. He's a person. Probably a good guy. At least depends. But even if he stole and doesn't have money and was sold, so they point out, right, that one of the ways that you said the reasons why a servant is sold because he stole and he can't afford to pay, so you sell him as a servant. They say, what is that gain? So one of the reasons that some of the commentators give is because you want to teach him how to behave properly. You don't throw him into prison and leave him with the other bad guys. So he goes to a master's house who gives him his pillow and gives him his blanket. You see, oh, that's a mensch. Hopefully that was part of it. Either way, so an Eved on the one hand is like a movable property because he moves. He's a person. He's definitely not like real estate. He's not stationary. On the other hand, he is compared to many cases in the Torah to land from the pasuk Visnachaltem by a shvua, an oath, and a transaction. So in those cases, he is similar. So now when a guy says my land, or a guy says my movables, is he including a servant or not? So Amar le'acha breder Rav Avia. Rav Acha, the son of Rav Avia, said the following to Rav Ashi. Well, let's prove to you from different cases. So Tashma, we had this a while ago, a long time ago. Hamocher se'ir. So the Steibers own the city, and they're selling the city. Hamocher is here, they're selling the city of Portland. What's included in that? So Mocher, Batim, you sell the houses go, the Shichin, all the pits and the cisterns, Umaros, Umerchatzos, the bathhouses go, Ubeis Abadin, Ubeis Hashlachin. I think it's the wine press. No, the oil press or the wine press? What is it? No, the one before that. I think it's the oil press, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Beis HaShachan, they don't translate it. Usually Beis HaShachan refers to fields that need irrigation. They need shlach, the water sent to it. So okay, avaloa samitaltalin. But when you're selling a city, all the non-movables, all the movables are not included. It's only things that are stationary. Ubizman sha'amar hi v'chol ma shebesocho. When you say I'm selling the city and everything which is included in the city, so now afilu, if we say everything, it includes afilu, even hayabel behema, even an animal. Oh, avadim, hare kulan mechurin. Everything is sold. So once again, if you sell a city, the servants are not included. If you sell everything in a city, even the servants are included. That word even is going to be important. So now, Ella e amris kimikarki dami. If you want to tell me the servants like land, amailam is davin. When you sell a city and all the other land goes to the pits, and and all the things that are stationary go, the Eved should go too. No, but we see he doesn't. So therefore you see that an Eved is under the category of metaltalin, of things that are movable, not things that are stationary. Says the Gemara, yeah, but look at the end of that statement. So what do you want to say? You want to say a servant is like a movable property? So then my afilu, when you say kol, everything in the city, you say even the servants. Even the servants. You don't say even the cars. Meaning, if a servant's under the category of movables, what's even the servants? Well, what's that? Yeah, what does that mean? It just should be like a regular movable. So says the Gemara, Maya filu. So what do you have to say? We're going to make a difference within movables now. Now, once you make a difference in movables, you can make a difference by the stationary too. Ella my ischalamemer. What do you have to say? Shiny metaltla denayid mi metaltla delonayid. Obviously, you see from the second part of that statement, even animals and even servants. It's showing you that there's a difference between movables that don't usually move. Things that are movables that
propel itself.
That's right, a fancy way to say it. Yeah. And there's a difference between movables that propel itself. Nayid means that they move around. So that's why it says a filu. So there's a big difference when you're selling everything in the city. So what are you referring to, everything in the city? You could say all the objects in the city, but maybe we're not referring to things that move around. You say no, even things that move around. Well, says the Gemara, well, if that's true, so then you don't have a proof that a servant is categorically under the category of movables, because once you made this distinction within one category, there's no longer two. Before we had two categories, stationary movables. Now you divided movables into two: movables that move and movables that don't move. Well, once you said that, just make two categories in the stationary things. Afilu tema kimikarka. Maybe a servant's like karka. He's like land. How come when he sold the city, the servant wasn't included? Shiny mikarka denayid, mi mikarka delonayid. There's a difference between land that moves and land that doesn't move. What's land that moves? A servant. So therefore, once you made that distinction, then you lost your proof. So therefore, that this brisa, this Mishnah is not a good proof. Is a servant under the category of movables or under the category of stationary items? So Amalei Ravina Ravashi Tashma. How about the following? Hakose, right? We just had this. Hakose, Kol Nechasav. You sell all the property. You give over all your property to your servant. What happens? Yatsa ben Chorin. Servant goes free. However, if you leave over some land, if you give over all my property to my servant, except for some land, Shire Karka Kol Shehu, Lo Yatsa ben Chorin. And then he does not go free. Because we assume what the master is leaving over when he left over land is he leaves over the servant. Lo Yatsa ben Chorin. Rabbi Shimon Omer La'olam Hu ben Chorin Ach Yomer Kol Nachas and Estun Leploni Avdi Chutz Me'echad Miribui Shebehen. Rabbi Shimon has an interesting opinion that when you give over all your property to your servant, so then if you leave over 1/10,000th of your property, then that must be referring to the servant, and therefore he does not go free. Okay, it's just a repetition of what we had not so long ago. V'amar Abdimi Bar Yosef, Amar Belazar, Asu metaltlin shir etzel eved, v'lo asu metaltlin shir etzel ksuba. When it came to servants, so then even though it said karka, it refers to stationary items also. So if you give over all your property and leave over something that's movable, so then that could be referring to this to the eved. So let's say the master said, I'm giving you all my property except for some movables. That could also be referring to an eved. However, by a woman, if you give over all your land to your children and you leave her a little bit of movables, and she's quiet, in that case, she does not forego an ksuba, and you're still going to owe her a ksuba. It's only if you leave over for her some land and she's quiet, does she agree to take this land for her ksuba, and the rest of the land that she just watched you give over to the children, she does forego on. The Amarle Rabale Rav Nachman, my taima. So what's the reason? What's the reason that when you leave over some movables, it could be referring to your servant? Also, my taima, because avda is metaltlahu. Since a servant is considered a movable property, when you leave over some movables, that could be referring to a servant because they're in the same category. Well, so what do you see? A servant is like a movable. Now, when you give over all your property to your servant, and then you leave over some movables, that could be referring to a servant too, since he's also in the category of movables. So you see from that discussion that they view a servant under the category of a movable property, not stationary. The ksubas isha, that's mikarkahu. Ksubas isha has to be collected from land. So when you leave over movables, instead of leaving over land, that's not called leaving over, so to speak, for that halacha by a woman, because we specifically want her to collect. We establish that she must collect from land and not from movables. Okay, but what do you see here? It sounds like an eved is under the category of a movable. Turning the page. So, Amrle, no, you cannot bring a proof from the case where a master gives all of his property over to his servant and leaves out some movables, and that in that case, since an eved doesn't go free, sounded like he was under the category of movables, right? So that should be a great proof. We say, no, you can't bring a proof from that. Why? It's very interesting. Amrle anan mishum, we say, mishum delav kruskita masisan. By a woman, when you give a get, by a woman, it's something called in the Torah get krisis. It has to be fully given over. You know, if you say, I'm divorcing you except for on Tuesdays, things like that, that's not called a full, you need a full separation. The get is a total cutting off. So therefore, and now, a get krisis by an eved, this document of emancipation, I think it calls, right? This document to free the eved is learned out of a document from a woman. So you also have to have full separation. So when you leave something over, the reason why the servant doesn't go free is because you're not fully separating yourself from him. You're leaving some stuff for yourself, some stuff to him. That's not called a full separation. Since that's not a full separation, so therefore, it's not going to be really considered a good enough document to free your servant. But you cannot bring a proof from there that a servant is categorically under movables. Maybe that case is different because it was a problem in the document that you gave. It wasn't a full separation document. Yeah. Since he's giving over his property, except for some of the things, so you're not fully set. The document is not a document of full separation because you're keeping for yourself something that you want. And for a separation document, you have to have much more than that. The Rashbam brings another explanation, is that the other explanation to me made a little bit more sense, was when you write a document to a servant, right? Maybe really a servant is like land, let's say. But when you write a document over to a servant and you leave over something, so once you left over something, who says you don't want to leave over more things? We see you're leaving over things. So maybe your servant is also included in that. You need to make a document that's a full separation with leaving no ambiguity. Then you know for sure he's free. But as long as you see you leaving over some property for yourself, maybe a servant's also left over for you. You don't see that clarity from a document like you wanted. Therefore, it's not considered a get krisis, and therefore he does not go free, and therefore you can't bring out any proof that a servant is like movables or like a stationary or like stationary things. Okay. Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, Chamisha, Achi Yichtavu, Kol Nechseim. So there are 5 things that until you write, Kol Nechseim, it's not going to go. So let's see, what are those 5 things? So, let's see. The Eluhain, a Shchiv Meira. So a Shchiv Meira has one halacha when you write over all your documents, all your property. But if you don't write all the property, it's going to have a different halacha, like we know from our Mishnah. Avdo, we just said, a servant. If you write all your property, so he goes free. If you leave some over, he doesn't go free. Ishto, a person's wife, that when you give over, we'll see in a second what that is. Ubanav, Ishto, Ubanav, or Mavreches. So let's see. That's our Mishnah. When you write over all the property to somebody else and you leave some property for yourself, it's a good gift, and therefore, if you get better from your illness, you cannot retract on it. Lo shaya karka koshu. It's just a review. We've seen this Mishnah many times already. It's our Mishnah that we're on right now. If you didn't leave any property over, so then it's not considered a good gift. Meaning, if you would get better, you get your property back. Avdo. Once we just saw this today. You write all your property to an eved, he goes free. Shaya karka koshu lo yatsa ben chorin. You leave some property over, he leaves some land over, then he does not go free. Ishto, third case. You write all your property to your wife. This we had a while ago already, a few weeks ago. You write all your property to your wife. You don't mean to actually give her all your property and usurp the inheritance. You don't want to. It just means you're making her an apatrapa. She's a watchman. She's now in charge of the property. She's the the real estate broker, so to speak. So banav the Tnan hakosev. This we all said earlier. The Tnan hakosev kol nechas of lebanav. Because this is our case. The koshu. You write all of your property to your children, and you leave a little bit of land for your wife, and she's quiet. She doesn't say anything. Of the ksubasa. From the property that you gave over to your children, she's lost the ability to collect from that property, but the little property that you left over for her, she can collect from there. If you were to write all the property to her, then she becomes like a watchman, like a real estate broker. Now, what's the case of mavreches? This I don't think we've seen yet. A mavreches is the following: a lady who was married once before, she's getting remarried, and she wants all her property to not be brought into the marriage. So she writes it over to a third party that in the event that that her husband dies or divorces, she gets all the property back. This is a way for her to get her property back. So it's called a mavrech, like to chase away, right? To berech is to run away. Yaakov was berech from Esav. He ran away from Esav. So she wants to chase away the property from her husband, so to speak. She wants to give it to somebody else. So now, in that case, the Amar Mavreches tzricha, if she wants to do that, she has to write shetiktov kol nechaseha ubekulu metatle. Sorry. So she has to write all of her property to the third party. What would happen if she didn't write all her property? So if she wrote all of her property, then we realize that she that really she wants to just get married to this guy, and in the event something happens, she'll get her property back. But if she left something over, so then who says she'll get her money back? Meaning, if she leaves some property over, maybe she's doing a regular transaction with her property. If you give all of your property, that's a huge risk you're taking. So you see clearly when you give over all your property to a third person, it's just like a shchivmira in a certain way. We understand you're only doing this because you want to get married now, but of course you want it back if the marriage doesn't work out. But if you only gave part of your property over and you left some over, so then it's like a regular transaction. Then just because you want it back at the end of the day, you don't get it back. Just like a shchivmira. Ubekulu metatle havishir. All these 5 cases, if you leave over karka, it'll be the same halacha if you left over movables also, except for lebar miksuva. So a ksuva has to be collected from stationary property, cannot be collected from movables. The rabbis enacted that specifically from land